Hey guys, my guest tonight, Marc Hartzman, and I are going to be talking about weird history. We'll be right back. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing? Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of extremely sunny Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you need or you think you have a paranormal need, we can get to you. It might take us a couple days because California is this huge state. You don't realize how big it is. And I'm just going to give you a quick warning. I guess there's a lot of news out there because I've been getting internet slowdown warnings all for the last hour. So just beware. Like I say, everybody in my neighborhood has Xfinity. And so when the internet slows down, when everybody gets home and they're watching the news or whatever they're doing, the internet slows down. Anyway, getting back to the topic. And in the case that it takes us a couple days to get to you, we do have psychics on staff who can call you and talk to you about what may be going on or may not be going on. They can do remote reads. And in most cases, they can calm the energy down until we can get out there. It usually doesn't take us more than a couple days. Like I said, we have people all over the state. But it does happen. We even have teams in Hawaii. We have teams in Nevada. We have teams up in Oregon and Washington. So we can serve you pretty well. That being said, if you're watching from Facebook tonight, a lot of you are, and you haven't done so already, please feel free to hit that follow button because, we're always trying to build up our following, no matter what page you're watching from Facebook, because I know there's a few pages that we broadcast to. That would be great. Also, be sure to chat in the chat room. I will read your comments, and sometimes I'll talk about them, but if you chat amongst yourselves in the chat room, that works just as well. And if you like what you see in here tonight, please leave us a thumbs up, happy face, one of those happy heart things I can't do with my hands. Because what that does is that puts us up higher. It's being computer at Facebook. It gets their attention. Okay, same thing with YouTube. It works all the way across the boards for social media. And that puts us on the For You page. If you ever wondered what FYP means, see, I just got internet notes just now. If you ever wondered what FYP means, it is the For You page. And that is when the computers pick up on what's going on with your show or your talk or whatever you got going live. And they place you out there for everybody to see, like suggestions. It's like when you look at your Facebook page and you scroll down, and about halfway down, not the reels, but there's that other stuff that's down there with suggested people that you might know, that they think you might want to contact, or different groups. That's what that is. That is the For You page. That's Facebook and all those places saying, oh, so-and-so likes this. Let's throw this out there to suggest to them, okay? And it works like that with everybody. It's just different forms of it. Like YouTube has their own version of it, TikTok has their version of it, etc., etc., etc. Speaking of YouTube, if you're watching from YouTube tonight, and I know a lot of you do watch from YouTube, and you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button. Always looking for subscribers. We have over 1,000 shows sitting over on YouTube. All of this show. It's all this show. Nothing else but this show. And I don't like to stay on like the paranormal topic stuff all the time. I'm a journalist. I like to vary the topic. Like tomorrow, we're going to be talking about the Coral Castle. Today, we're talking about weird subjects from the United States. Different weird news and topics. So I don't like to stay on the paranormal stuff all the time. So please feel free, to where was I going with this? Oh yes, please feel free to subscribe. And there's also so many videos over there that when I go on that front page on the YouTube page, I get a headache. So what I've done is it's taken me a while because I keep adding shows, right? Every week there's 6 shows to add, every week. So I'm trying to go through and put these things in categories for you so it's easier to pick. So if you like cryptids, if you like this kind of weird news stuff that we're going to talk about today, weird subjects, you'll be able to go to a file for that and then look and see what shows on that topic are there and click on them and watch them. It makes it a lot easier. All right? And also, like I said, my hat, look at this. Everything is crooked today. My hat is off center. Maybe I put my head on wrong this morning or something. But anyway, yeah. So please subscribe and stuff. And again, chat room, all that FYP stuff. Twitch, same thing. Like I said, they all work the same, except they're a little different. I mean, especially with TikTok. The whole like thing with TikTok. TikTok, you got to double tap the screen. I mean, that's one of the differences with TikTok. Is it's more interactive. But I mean, like even with YouTube, it's a thumbs up or a happy face or whatever you need, or comment. Do whatever. Okay, I'm done spewing that. I want you to keep an ear out, or an eye out rather, because we're making changes to the Patreon page. There's going to be some really cool stuff coming out on there, and we'll have that discussion when Nancy Matz is on Thursday. About what's going on with the Patreon page. But I just want to give you guys a heads up that Nancy and I are working on some really cool things to put on there to get you guys to come over there and visit us over on our Patreon page, because it's lovely. Okay? All right, tonight I'm excited. My guest, Marc Hartzman. Weird oddities and stuff that we're going to be talking about. My father grew up in the age of the sideshows. I think he might have been at the tail end of the sideshow stuff, because he grew up, he was born in 1926, and so, but he had stories about going to these sideshows and seeing these different individuals. Nowadays people would probably have a fit, about these kind of people, because they're disabled, or however you want to call it, the woke crowd. We're just going to the woke crowd. But back then it was a big deal, and so I remember growing up, and my father would buy all kinds of books on the subject because he was just fascinated by it. And I still have the books. The books are in my living room, in my little library area. And once in a while I'll read them, because I grew up looking at that stuff and the photos, and because I couldn't read at first, so I was looking at photos of these different people. And I remember going to, I believe it was Vegas, with my mom and dad when I was little. We made a trip, and I remember staying at Circus, and we ran into, by then I think that Jojo the dog-faced boy was probably gone by then, but we did run into a family at Circus at that time, and I couldn't have been more than maybe 5 or 6, because it really set up with me, because like I said, my dad had talked about this all my life, and they had a family there, and I remember seeing them at Circus. So, this has been something that I followed. And there's other things we're going to be talking about, too, because I love that news. When I was editing the newspaper out in Roseville, I would find the weird news page, and I would pull stuff up from it, because I just think it's fascinating to listen to. Anyway, let me bring my guest on. He'll give you some background about what he does, who he is, and then we're going to swing into this stuff and have a good conversation. So, like I said in the back, come join the conversation. Do it. Get in the chat room, chit-chat about this stuff. Let's do this. Let's get involved today. Hello, sir.
Hi, Charlotte. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us about you.
Well, as you've kind of alluded to, I'm someone who loves weird history. So I'm an author. I'm also in advertising, sort of the day job. But I run a site called weirdhistorian.com, where I write about all sorts of weird pieces from history, as the name would suggest. And I've got 8 books published and 2 on the way, coming out in the next year. So I'm excited about that. And they're all kind of based on different aspects of weird history. So my second book was called American Sideshow, which is an encyclopedia of sideshow performers from the 1800s to early 2000s. Basically, that book came out in 2005. I've written about Oliver Cromwell's embalmed head, which I find to be a fascinating story. It's a memoir told from the head's perspective, covering 300 years of history. I've written about weird history about the planet Mars, the paranormal, in the book called Chasing Ghosts. And my latest book is called We Are Not Alone, which is all about the history of UFOs and aliens. Those last 3 are from Quirk Books. That just came out last October. So I love all these things. All these things fascinate me, and they're a lot of fun to research and interview people about and write about and share my passion with everybody who wants to read.
How hard it is to research these how hard it is. My God. Let me take it backwards today. I swear to God, my head's on backwards. How hard is it to research this stuff? I mean, when you go back to the sideshows, because, I mean, a lot of those, and what people don't realize, too, is a lot of these, circus folks, and, because I've covered a lot of stories for Barnum and Bailey, and a lot of these circus folk, it's families. It's tradition for them to do this stuff. So how hard is it to research this stuff on say, the sideshows, families involved with that?
Well, I would say in some ways, I was fortunate to be writing it, more than 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, the advantages now is you have a bit more accessibility with finding people online.
Mm-hmm.
But back then, when you didn't have quite as many, social media to reach out to, things like this, it's a little bit hard to find connections. But between a combination of digging up old newspaper articles and clippings and magazines and so forth, but really the best thing back then was I could interview a lot of people who were still alive. Um, a lot of people I interviewed for that book have passed on because they were rather, they were in their 70s, 80s at that point.
Sure.
So I was fortunate to be able to get to speak to them. And I think what kind of helped me a lot to get to know all these different people was they could see that I was really passionate about the subject matter that I was writing about from someone who was interested in it, and not from like the sociological standpoint about what's wrong with sideshows, nothing like that.
Right.
To me, this was a way that these people could really have a triumph over their anomalies that they were born with. And especially given the time periods, 1800s or the 1900s, there were no real opportunities. People tended to be ashamed of them if they were, family members, and might hide them away or institutionalize them. And that's no life at all. In the sideshow, they got to travel the world. They earned a living. They found love. They found camaraderie. So there's a lot of really nice, I think, triumphant, heartwarming stories about some of these people. And so, like, one of the showmen I spoke to, there were like two main showmen who were started in the in the 40s and basically worked to the end. Ward Hall, who was amazing. He just died a few years back in his late 80s. And another one in California, Bobby Reynolds. Both of them, shared so many stories with me about the people that they worked with. They worked with everybody, all the different sideshow performers. So they had all these amazing stories to share with me. And I was able to get in touch with many of them who were still alive. And then some of the younger performers, of course, who are still performing today. So I got a good mix of stories that way. But that to me was the best. Traveling, meeting these people in person, having conversations, and just listening and absorbing as much information as I could.
I always think, because I have weird feet. I'm going to admit that I have really wide feet. It's hard for me to fit shoes. And, I always think of the world's tallest man and what he passed away from. Because if I remember this one book my dad had, whether it's true or not, right? It said that he died because of an ill-fitting shoe.
A blister.
Yeah.
Yep.
So every time I have problems with my shoes, that's what I think about is him, because that left the impression on me.
Yeah. Well, that's Robert Wildlow that you're
Yes.
referring to, who's I would say is responsible for all of my weird interests because I was so fascinated by him when I was a kid. I used to get the Guinness Book of Records when it was those, small, thick, brick-like books, black and white. And I was fascinated by the Robert Wildlow pictures, and then the stats, like, he's 5 years old and he's 6 foot, whatever. Something like, he's just ridiculous heights, right, at these young ages. And you see him next to his dad when he's 10 and he's, a foot and a half taller. So I was so fascinated by that. And that's just really, I think, kind of put it in my head and planted the seed for my love of all things strange and unusual. He stood 8 feet, 11 and a half inches tall, which is just extraordinary. And I think he would have hit 9 feet if he didn't get that blister from the shoe. He had a brace, they wore, and he was traveling and it got infected. And by the time they could get him to a hospital, that blister had caused a fever of 106 degrees. And so ultimately that fever is what killed him, but caused by the blister from the shoe with the brace. Yeah, very sad. He was only 22. He's still growing.
Yeah, he wasn't very old when he passed.
Yeah.
Was there any particular, over the years reading about that, because, we're going to shift into ghosts here too as well, your ghostly stuff. Are there any particular, you talk about Waldo, are there any particular circus performer, I call them performers, sideshow performers that really made an impact on you?
Yeah, there's a bunch I've always found fascinating. Where to begin? Certainly the original Siamese twins, Chang and Eng, very classic. It's where the term Siamese twin comes from because they were born in Siam. And so I've always found their lives fascinating. Again, they made a good living by touring. That's where they made their money. They married twin sisters, not conjoined, and raised more than 20 kids between them, owned a bunch of land in North Carolina, still have descendants there today. So again, they really made a very strange way of having to live, work as best they could for them. I also I used to write weird news stories for AOL Weird News years
That's
back.
where I used to get my stuff.
Oh yeah,
Newspaper stuff. When I worked in
yeah.
the
So
newspaper.
I kind of had like the sideshow beat. This was like 2009 to 2011 or so,
Yep.
before HuffPost took over. So one of my favorite stories I got to do was about another set of conjoined twins, Ronnie and Donnie Gallion, who died just a few years back, but they had been the oldest conjoined twins at that point, which was their goal. They wanted to reach that. So they lived in Dayton, Ohio, and because they were aging and they were connected kind of at the chest and stomach, very not like Chang and Eng, who had a little bit of room between them. They were like, facing each other basically. So as they got older, their physical condition got difficult. It was hard for them to move around easily. I mean, it was always hard to move around, but it was becoming more and more difficult. And they didn't really have a house built for them. And they had a brother who lived miles away that would come care for them. So a group was raising money to build an addition to the brother's house in Dayton that would be customized to fit their needs and attached to the brother's home. So he'd be right there to help, and everything would be easier and simpler for them to live. People donated beds that were designed for them to be in comfort. So it's a really wonderful project. And I wrote about this for AOL Weird News, and they needed more money. And I mentioned, that they were looking for donations. And that article generated several $1,000s in donations to help put them over the edge. And I was able to then write about that. But I love the fact that I was able to write something that actually was able to make a real impact on their lives and help with a project that some amazing people put forth and were able to complete. So things like that I love. There's another favorite story is going back much further before I was alive, from the turn of the century. One of the performers I've always loved is a guy named Lalu. And he had a parasitic twin. So basically an unborn twin that's kind of jutting out from his chest. So arms, legs, torso, and a functioning penis as well. So imagine that, right? That's really bizarre. He'd have it dressed in little clothes, and that would perform. Kind of just step out, and probably talked about his story and everything. But what I really love about the story is the showman thought, like, you know what? We can make this even more bizarre. We'll dress it as a girl and say it's your sister. It's not like, wow, it wasn't weird enough that you had a small unborn twin, still partially functioning attached to your body. You went ahead and pushed it even further. So, it's the showmanship at the turn of the century. So I always found that to be a fascinating story. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really amazing stories about these people. Lots of, like, I could probably go on and on.
Was they treated all right? Because you see stuff on TV, different stories, where they're not treated so good. So on the ones that you interviewed, how were they treated?
I mean, there's stories like that. I'm not going to say that everyone was treated wonderfully, but you could probably say about any job, there's people who get treated poorly, right? So there were some people who were taken advantage of to some degree, and that's obviously that's not good. But like I said, for the most part, the freaks, as they like to be called, they were the kings of the sideshow. They were the ones, and again, talking like turn of the century, late 1800s, they made a lot of money, like a lot of money, especially for back then, much more than the working acts, which would be the people who were sword swallowers or fire eaters, people who learned a skill. They weren't born different. So they made a great living doing that. And they traveled Europe. They met kings and queens. So to me, I look at it as like, I would say for the most part, people did well living in the sideshow. Actually, I did a book a few years ago, 2 years ago, I guess, called the Scrapbook of Agnes Schwarzenbacher, who was also known as the Rubber Skin Lady. And so after American Sideshow came out, her great niece emailed me and sent me a note saying that she had the scrapbook from Agnes from the 1930s, from her show life in Ripley's Believe It or Not auditoriums and other sideshows. And she didn't know what to do with this scrapbook, but it's incredible because it had all of her pictures from sideshows, pitch cards from other performers, newspaper clippings. So for years, I wanted to reproduce this, and I finally did. That's available, actually, at my other site, curiouspublications.com. Limited edition of those, but it's reproduced exactly as she had it. And her story was, again, so she was rubber skin lace. She would look perfectly normal from the waist up, but then her legs had this very stretchy, fleshy skin that you could stretch out about, 14, 15 inches. And so she could wear a dress and cover it up, but then on stage she could show, stretch out her skin to show how flexible and stretchy that was, elastic. And her family didn't like this. They didn't want anyone to know. If it were up to them, she would have stayed home all the time and covered it up, and no one would ever know. And she didn't want that, so she went out and she married, and she was able to have friends in the sideshow, and that became her family. And she toured the country and the world, and she wouldn't have had that otherwise. And she didn't, she was happy doing that. She talked about it. You can see the notes and everything. And I spoke with her great niece who remembered stories and heard stories from other family members. So again, I think, of course, there's situations that weren't great, but for a lot of people, it was a good opportunity and an opportunity that later people wanted to take away from them because they didn't think it was good.
When you talk about I remember the elastic skin man. I remember that really impressed me as a kid because he was
the cheeks,
able to,
the
cheeks,
neck, yeah.
Is that a disease that people get, or is that oddity, or just something that happens every once in a while? Do you know?
Yeah, it's a condition. I think it's called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, if I remember correctly. But yeah, I feel like you still see people with that. I feel like I saw that several years ago, maybe on one of those Guinness primetime TV shows or something. They'd have someone come and stretch out their skin, a foot, whatever they could do. So yeah, you still see those things every now and then. There's still people born with oddities and different, odd conditions. Right now, there's a kid going to play basketball at Florida who's 7'9" and still growing. I mean, that's amazing. I'm curious to see if he supplants the world's tallest man, who's 8'3", who I had the pleasure of meeting years back when I was working on AOL Weird News.
You don't imagine being that tall, though. I mean, everything has to be custom made for you.
It's not easy. Yeah.
Well, I know they make cars for these guys. The basketball players and stuff, where they make specialized cars so they can drive.
Yeah, I don't know how they could fit in a regular car. Yeah. I never understand how they can fly a regular plane. I mean, I'm uncomfortable on the plane, and I'm 5'10".
Right.
So.
Right. Well, it's a fascinating thing to read about. It's a fascinating thing to research. A lot of people don't realize that, especially nowadays. This generation, and I hate to sound old because, well, I am, but this generation that's coming in behind me, they didn't see all that stuff. They didn't get to read about all that stuff. It's nice to have someone like you to write about that, to keep people aware of that stuff, because that's history that actually happened.
Yeah, and I mean, I see a lot of these as like inspirational stories. Like there's another guy, Prince Randian, who, if you've seen the movie Freaks from 1932, which is a wonderful movie that everyone here should watch if you haven't seen it, by Todd Browning. So Prince Randian had no arms or legs.
That's right.
And in the movie, you see him roll a cigarette with his lips and tongue and light it. And this was a guy who, again, toured with lots of sideshows and made a living and was married and had several kids. And I always feel like, look, if this guy can find love and support a family with no arms or legs, like, you guys should be good. You should be able to do something too. Absolutely. When you're fully limbed. So I see a lot of those as inspirational stories. It should, you should feel good that they found a way to deal with their anomaly and make it work and succeed as much as they possibly could.
Absolutely, it's very inspirational. When you think back, what do you think? I mean, like you say, up until about 2000, there were still sideshows.
Still,
are you seeing it? Are you seeing any more of those, or do you think it's tapering off now? Because this culture that we live in is so different from what it was, and people's opinions about stuff. So I wonder if that's hurt the sideshows at all.
Well, there's still sideshows. I mean, Coney Island, for example, still has its 10-in-1 sideshow. And there's other shows that are still touring as well, and there are some people with who were born different performing in those shows. So you'll still see sideshows with actual freaks in them, but most of them are mostly filled with the working acts, which, as I mentioned, will be sword swallowers, fire eaters, glass eaters, the human blockhead, where you pound the nail into your head, and variations on these acts. These are acts that go back centuries.
Mhm.
But there's always, interesting twists and new creative ways to perform them, and pushing them to different levels and making them even more daring than they already are. So they're still performing, and it's entertainment. It's fascinating to see what the human body is capable of doing. That's what
Mhm.
makes it fun. You see something you don't think is possible, and sure enough, it is possible. Someone has dared
Absolutely.
to do it, and they've done it.
Absolutely. Just like and then I heard this too. The dog face people.
Hmm.
Those families. They're from a village, aren't they? They're supposed to be a village where there's just that's just where they are, like up in Mexico somewhere.
Well, there's a family from Mexico
Okay.
it runs through the family, and
Okay.
it's different genes. The JoJo dog face boy, if I remember correctly, I think his father also had it,
Mhm.
unless I'm thinking of Lion the Lion Face Man. But the family from Mexico, one of them, the Wolf Boy, was performing with the Venice Beach Freak Show just a few years back.
Mhm.
Um, Another, I think some of his relatives performed just in circuses. They were acrobats. They would do
Mhm.
trapeze and so forth. It wasn't like they'd go stand on stage and show that they had fur, hair all over
Right.
their face. They would perform. They just happened to have hair on their face
Okay. Yeah, I
and
just wondered
everywhere else.
about that. Just wondered about that.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about Mars. You've done research into Mars,
Yes.
and what have you found out in your research?
Well, a whole book's worth. uh, Here, let me grab it. Um, this is the big book of Mars right here. So it's uh, Mars has a fascinating history.
Mhm.
Uh, First of all, what got me into this was an article I stumbled across. This goes back to Weird History, from 1926, which was about a Martian woman, who was supposedly in telepathic communication with a lawyer in London. And and her name was Umaruru. She was over 7 feet tall, had big ears and tall hair. I'm seeing this headline about this, right? This is like a clipping I'm just stumbling upon. And I thought, what is going on here? This is so bizarre. So I dug into it much deeper. So this guy was basically saying he had these telepathic communications, learning about life on
Mhm.
Mars, the Martians there, and uh, and so he decided he was going to send a telegram to Mars, because Mars was in opposition that year, 1926, which meant it was its closest point in orbit, which was about 35 million miles away at that point.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mars orbits, it's every 2 years, it's close to the Earth again. So Rugby Radio Tower in London was the world's tallest, most powerful radio tower in the world at that point. So they sent a telegram to Mars, and this guy assured the world that we'd be receiving a response from the Martian scientists, because he heard that from Umaruru. And
Mhm.
this was like making headlines in newspapers across the planet. Like, this was big news. And of course, we didn't get anything because they're not there. But he tried again 2 years later, and again, same results, and basically said our scientists weren't smart enough to receive the messages from the Martians. But as I dug into that story more, I was learning about all the different thoughts and beliefs that were going on in the late 1800s, early 1900s, which was this idea that there was intelligent life on Mars and they could be reaching us anytime now. And part of the belief of why they were there was because, well, a couple things. One is Mars is a smaller planet than Earth, meaning it cooled faster, meaning evolution would have started sooner. And I was kind of building off of Darwin's Origin of Species in the mid 1800s, thinking like, okay, that applies across the solar system, the universe. So Martians are probably far more advanced than we are because they started much earlier than we did.
Mhm.
Then in 1877, you have an Italian astronomer named Giovanni Schiaparelli who spots this network of lines across the planet and calls them canali, which means channels, but it was translated as canals.
Mhm.
And canals are, those are man-made. And we had just completed the Suez Canal, which took like 10 years. It's a huge engineering feat. So everyone's thinking like, my God, this whole planet's covered with canals. These people must be huge and, amazing engineers. So that idea began spreading and spreading. And then you have all these thoughts on what Martians might look like. And it's all kind of covered off in the book. So I wrote all about that. I talked about a lot of the NASA lore, all these ideas about Martians inspired young sci-fi writers and young scientists, and it just
Mhm.
kind of starts building up to the point where we now have robots on Mars. But one thing I forgot to mention, I love about all the old Martian stories from, again, going up into the 1920s, is, and into the 30s as well, is you have the Orson Welles War of the Worlds broadcast in October 30th, 1938, that panicked the nation, thinking that Martians really did attack. It's a brilliant radio broadcast. If people haven't heard that, you should look it up. It's really incredibly well done. So people believe this, and I always thought that seemed silly because I always knew about that story growing up. I thought, how can anyone believe that? But when you realize that you've had people like Nikola Tesla and Guglielmo Marconi, all these people saying that Martians exist and believing they've been contacted and they'll be here soon. This is like major newspapers and headlines often. It's probably not that shocking to think that they thought it finally happened. So that was fascinating. And one of my other favorite things from the Big Book of Mars, there's a whole, gets into more of the real, more current science, or recent science, recent being like the different missions to Mars. So going back to Viking in the 70s. And one thing I never knew was that the Viking mission detected evidence for life on Mars. And that I thought was shocking. I've never heard that before, but I spoke with both of the co-experimenters who have also both since passed away. They're in their late 80s and mid 90s when I spoke with them, but still completely sharp, believed completely in their data. And when it happened, NASA believed it may have been an exotic chemical response. They were not convinced it was a biological response. Basically, there was a chemical radioactive nutrient dropped into the soil, and that soil then was tested and saw that it was metabolized, released a gas, therefore showing evidence for some form of life. And they had done lots of testing, obviously, in advance to make sure everything was foolproof. So they both stood by their data. NASA obviously never would confirm it and never repeated the test either. But it makes me believe that there probably is some sort of microorganism beneath the surface, which maybe someday we'll find. We know there's water down there.
Right.
Being underground, it protects you from the solar radiation. So there's reason to believe that life could thrive. We see it thriving here on Earth, a mile beneath the surface of our own planet. So, why not? So yeah, it gets into a lot of fun, amazing stories. I loved writing this book.
Do you think that there are buildings on Mars? Because that's what people claim. That they actually see structures.
I mean, I don't think so. I think I wrote a little bit about like the face on Mars and a little bit about some of the pyramids, and so many of those things are, I think to some degree, a bit of an optical illusion. The face on Mars, later images showed different lighting and different angles. You could see the same thing, but did not look like a face anymore when you hit this way, when you hit that way. Shadows, lighting, all these different things that go into it. I don't think that there's ancient civilization architecture left personally. But I do think there's probably something there. I wouldn't be surprised to find that. But most of the things I see, I kind of struggle to think are, what people think. I think it's a little bit like finding shapes in the clouds. I think it's called pareidolia. Like your mind kind of fills in patterns because that's what the mind wants to do. So it's kind of easy to spot things and see things, but I don't think that means that that's what it is.
Well, lighting makes a big difference too. I mean, like you say, the different, when it's lit from different angles, it looks a lot different.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's one angle where it looks like a face, and the other angle, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I never heard about the plant life that NASA detected.
Yeah, I know. When I heard about that, I thought, why does no one know about this?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, the science community knows, and it's in their white papers and things like that. But no one outside of that community really reads that stuff. So that was a fun story for me to be able to share. And again,
I wonder, especially because Mars does have a polar ice cap, just like we do. So obviously, there's water there somewhere. Yeah.
And then they've detected it. Various chunks of ice beneath the surface. Again, it's deep, but it's there. So you have the ingredients for life. So why not?
Have you done any research on the moon?
Not a whole lot. I did do some fun pieces on the moon for Weird Historian. There have been beliefs about life on the moon as well, which is probably not shocking. I have a few fun stories about that. My favorite One of them is like where people really believe there was life on the moon, kind of
Mhm.
similar ways they thought life was on Mars. But there's a great story called "The Great Moon Hoax of 1835," where a editor of the New York Sun wrote a whole story about having detected life on Mars through a famous astronomer's telescoping. And this is very early in these kinds of things. And
Mhm.
you know, if you heard that this astronomer saw with his new powerful telescope saw life on the moon, what's not to believe?
Mhm.
So there's all these amazing illustrations, and you can see those on my site, but very detailed of the different fauna and flora that's covering Mars. There were these Batmen, they call them, like these winged creatures, look like
Mhm.
men, but they had wings, you know.
Mhm.
So, uh, different kinds of creatures. It was very descriptive about what this life was like, and they kept having new images every day. And finally, by the end of the week, he came out and told someone that he'd made it up, and the whole thing, the cat was out of the bag at that point. But
Right.
people, I think, loved the story because circulation continued to rise for the newspaper. It wasn't really hurt by it. But for 1 week, people believed that there was life on the moon, for sure.
Wow. Well, when you think about people seeing what they want to see in Paradelium, as kids, let's look at the man in the moon. Your parents always pointing that out. See, there's a man in the moon right there. And, it does look like that. Certain times you can still see it to this day, but all it is lighting on the craters.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, I know there's stories out there about the astronauts, seeing structures on the moon. I don't, I'm not an expert, don't know, but that's just the stories that are out there. Do you think it's because that we really want to hope that that we're not the only planet out there, that can sustain life? Do you think that's part of that? That's why we're so eager to embrace this thing. There's life on moon. There's people living on the moon underneath the ground, or even on Mars.
I think so. I think that we want to believe that we are not alone,
Mm-hmm.
which shameless plug for my new book, We Are Not
There
Alone.
you go.
But that's
That works.
yeah, I do think that it's one of those things. It's like it's kind of scary to think if someone might be coming here, but it's also scary to think that we might be completely alone.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's kind of interesting about that whole thought is like going on with what you were saying. Centuries ago, it was easy to say like there's life on the moon, there's life on Mars. I mean, going like mid 1800s, there were people believing that there was life on all the planets.
Mm-hmm.
I have a book from the 1830s written by an amateur astronomer in England named Thomas Dick, who basically wrote a census of every planet in the solar system and included the sun. And he was extrapolating population figures from England and
Mm-hmm.
what he knew about the size of the planets, and basically was mapping out how many people, beings lived on these different planets. So this was like kind of a normal belief.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that eventually that kind of willed down to maybe just Mars, and that lingered on for a long time until we could send spacecraft there and see that there was nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
But now that we know that there's no other life, at least intelligent life in the solar system, I still think they may find, like I said, microorganisms on Mars and Europa, one of the moons that's got like massive oceans beneath like 10 miles of ice. There could be something there, but again, nothing I think like us we can feel pretty confident about. So we just expand the reaches, right? Like, okay, well, maybe life is in other parts of the galaxy or in other galaxies. There's we have these crazy numbers of how many exoplanets we've discovered in the past 20 years, and that gives us hope for the potential of life on Earth-like planets that might have a Goldilocks range from its star. So there's all these, we just kind of keep projecting it further and further out with the hope that there could be something there. And I mean, it's exciting because we may actually start finding some stuff out soon. SETI's been looking for extraterrestrial life with radio waves for decades,
Mm-hmm.
but now they can start searching for techno signatures with some of these new powerful telescopes like James Webb and its successor, which will launch in, I think, a decade or so, maybe more. But it's giving them the technology to see if some of these exoplanets might be emitting certain gases that they could conclude are coming from some sort of technology, meaning that some intelligent life has created it.
Mhm.
Which is something fascinating. I spoke with people at NASA about that and wrote about it. And we are not alone. One of the points I love about that, though, is even if we find that techno signature indicating that some intelligent technology has been created on the planet, it's not ours. That might not mean that life is there because we have it on Mars right now. We
Right.
have technology on Mars, but no one's there. So the question would then become, okay, well then who put it there, of course. But lots of fascinating questions and some amazing answers that I'm hoping we will have, within our lifetime.
Well, the other thing I take into consideration with all this, you know, we want to assume that they're in our galaxy. That if there is other, there's other living beings, they're in our galaxy. But maybe the reason why we can't contact anybody, and we haven't been able, with SETI to contact anybody, is they might be 2 or 3 galaxies over. Because I mean, there's just billions. As Carl Sagan would say, there's billions and billions of stuff out there.
Yeah, and as he would say, be a waste of space if nothing was out there.
Yeah, yeah, you know.
But yeah, it's true. I mean, it's hard to say. And within our own galaxy, we are in a safe region, on the edge
Mhm.
of the Milky Way. But in the middle of the Milky Way, there's gamma ray bursts, which star can blow up, and its entire, like, imagine all of the power of our sun
Mhm.
being emitted over the course of like 24 hours. That happens like in the middle of the galaxy. So if there was life at some point, it could be wiped out quickly and all too frequently to maybe not give us a chance to communicate, or
Mhm.
develop far enough to learn to communicate. So there's a lot of variables that go into it, and I look at us also as how remarkably unique we are and
Mhm.
lucky. You think about the fact that if it wasn't for the asteroid like knocking out the dinosaurs, would we even be here? If or
Mhm.
some mammals didn't scurry away and survive all that and develop into us, would we
Mhm.
be here? We've got this perfect gravity. I mean, there's a lot of things that are pretty special about Earth. Not to say that
Mhm.
couldn't be happening elsewhere, because again, the numbers are extraordinary, and figure the odds are that something else is out there. But what that
Absolutely.
something else is who knows? Like I said, I think
So you've
remarkably
talked
unique.
to people at NASA now. Just, I mean, obviously, there's all these stories about Area 51. You got all these other stories. Do people at NASA think that there's a chance for other life to be out there?
Yeah, I mean they're looking. Again, it's I think out there. I don't think a lot would say that they're here.
Mhm.
Some may. I mean, NASA is now actually working to try to understand what UAP are, and if there
Mhm.
are things flying in our airspace and helping us identify those things. But I think they do think that life is out there. I mean, that's why they're looking for techno signatures, and that's why they had the um, life detection experiments on Viking.
Mhm.
Uh, I think that they are looking for signs of life, as they can, using the technology that we have. But I do think that they think it's elsewhere, not
Mhm.
here yet. For the most part, I can't speak for everybody, obviously.
Right. 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 What's your belief?
What's my belief?
Yeah.
It's such a tough question for me all the time. Having written "We Are Not Alone," I had this. I think I think that book is really unique in that it really covers all aspects. So
Mhm.
you get opinions from you know the scientific community, and then you have people who've experienced UFOs and in all different forms, um, and they have amazing stories. And then you have like the more current things happening with the Navy pilots and the Tic Tac and Lou Elizondo, who I spoke with, and Christopher Mellon, who I spoke with, working within the government and intelligence, and the things that they have to say. And there's a lot of compelling evidence that something is here. We don't know
Mhm.
what it is. But I think what's exciting is that they're finally taking it a bit more seriously. And I think the big reason they're taking it seriously is the way Christopher Mellon positioned it with the government, that this is a matter of national defense. If there's
Mhm.
something in our airspace and we don't know what that thing is, we need to find out.
Mhm.
That's just makes sense, right?
Right. Right.
And if it's from a foreign power, we need to know that. If there's some amazing advancement, we need to know. And if it's elsewhere, well, that would be good to know also. So I like that it's being explored more closely, and I love that people like Avi Loeb, who runs the Galileo project out of Harvard,
Mm-hmm.
has the clout and the know-how to really collect data and try to understand things and figure things out. And he attracts other scientists, like more than 100 scientists working with him, which is because they can get past the stigma now, which for decades scientists didn't want to touch it because of the stigma associated with UFOs. So I think it's exciting that we have people who are now not afraid to research it and try to understand things. Maybe we finally do learn something. Maybe it's some weird aspect of physics we didn't know before, and we learn more about that, about our own world.
Right.
Or maybe we do find out that we are not alone and someone is visiting, which also is exciting. So I guess I'm giving you a very long, convoluted answer here, but what I'm saying is I'm very open-minded that there could be something. I'm not like totally sold because I'd like to see some better evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Much of what you hear is just stories from other people. I haven't seen anything myself. I wish I had. I know people who have, and it's been transformative for them. And there really are compelling cases. The Phoenix Lights from 1997 with the triangular UFO passing that 20,000 people saw. It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
What explains that? But maybe there is a terrestrial explanation that we just don't know about. Secret project that's just been kept quiet, but it's possible. We don't know.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's what makes it such a fun subject. There's so many possibilities and options, and it seems like something's got to be out there.
Right. Yeah, there's just so much word that you get from people. The contactees and everybody else that there's just so many stories out there. There has to be something to it, one way or another.
Yeah, and you hear a lot of similar stories.
Yeah.
But then there's certain things. Again, it's like I feel like I got like the angel and devil on my shoulders because I got these voices here and these voices here,
Okay.
But there's certain cases. Again, there's a lot of cases that are completely unexplained. But then there's a lot of cases that have fairly rational explanations. In the 50s, contactees, which are my favorite group because there's so many weird stories about meeting Venusians and flying in ships and marrying Venusian, all these crazy funny stories. But this was also a time with going back to Area 51 when they were testing new high altitude aircraft, mainly Cold War related, meant to spy on the Moscow and see what's going on over there. And so people are seeing, including pilots, are seeing things flying at these heights that no one's ever seen before and didn't think was possible, like by a long shot, like tens of thousands of miles higher. So, or feet higher, I should say, not miles. But and the government was basically content to let people believe that these were UFOs, because they couldn't say, "Oh yeah, well this is our U-2, high altitude flyer." They're not going to say that. So they had Project Blue Book saying, just tell them whatever, don't tell them what it is. So those were mistaken often for UFOs by a lot of people. So there's cases like that, like, okay, well that's a logical explanation. But again, there's plenty that are not logical like that, and that's what keeps the mystery alive and exciting. Right.
Let's talk about the paranormal a little bit.
Sure.
What kind of weird stories have you come across?
It's another one. It's similar to UFOs. There's so many amazing stories, and some of them have interesting potential explanations, and so many don't. And again, that's where it's like, okay, well, what's that one? Like, how do you explain that? Again, where to begin with this one? My kind of love for the paranormal began with spiritualism, modern spiritualism, more like again, late 1800s. I love that whole era. There's so many amazing beliefs. I love the different stories of mediums and the things that they were able to create during seances and the manifestations, and a lot of that was just very clever trickery that they were doing, but it's remarkable. But then there's all these amazing stories of just people experiencing something really odd. One of my favorites, which is much more modern to get away from the 1800s, was one of the parapsychologists who I interviewed. His name is Lloyd Auerbach. He's out in California. So he's researched this for decades, and he told me a story of a good friend of his who was an author and an aviator, and he had passed away. And Lloyd said he was on his way to an airport. I think he was going to Portland, and he had a fairly new car. And he said all of a sudden he smelled this cigar smoke, which smelled like the cigar that his friend used to smoke often. And it just lingered in the car. And he thought, that's so weird. And he just passed away recently. I forgot how recent, but it was recent. And then a friend called him on the other side of the country who was also a pilot and said that he was flying over on the East Coast and smelled this cigar smoke. And Lloyd said, I just smelled this cigar smoke too. And there was like 10 minutes between the two experiences. And that other pilot had another friend, also I think also a pilot from in the South, who 10 minutes after also smelled cigar smoke that was very reminiscent of their friend. And so that sort of olfactory sensation is very odd to me. And I like these thoughts that there could be these different ways that you might experience a lost friend or loved one, whether it's in the mind's eye or olfactory or something like that. That's hard to explain. I think there's a lot of interesting science that explains a lot of things that people experience, which I find fascinating. But then you have these things where, like, well, that doesn't explain that, So we can find some answers, but obviously we don't have all the answers. And the same thing. That's what keeps the mystery alive, and all of us interested in wondering.
Right. Well, see, as a paranormal investigator, when my mother passed away, this is kind of along the story you just told, and I knew she didn't want to be dirty, so I bathed her. But I thought, you know what? I want to bathe her in a certain scented soap to see if she returns, to see if I could figure out if she returns. So I did. And that evening, while we were sitting around talking in the living room, we could smell her walking around us via the soap. And so when she still comes back to visit, and she does frequently, I can tell it's her because of that certain soap.
Wow.
Yeah. But I had done that on purpose because I wanted to see, okay, I want to be able to tell if you come back. This is the way to do it. And that's what I did. So I had my own little experiment going on. But yeah, I mean, the story you just told about the smoke, I mean, I believe that completely. Because I've heard so many stories about that. And like I said, I did it myself just to see what would happen. If that happens, and it does. So it's wonderful to think that they can come back and be around us.
Well, that's what I think too. And when I wrote Chasing Ghosts, which is I'll show that one too. This book right here.
There you go.
And again, it's got all kinds of different stories in it, and some, like I said, if there's a good explanation, I find that fascinating, and if there's not, very fascinating. So I like sharing it all. But ultimately, what I say at the end is that you kind of have two choices. You can, you take the information of stories and you take what you want from that, but you can decide that there's nothing or that there's something. And for me, it's much more comforting to believe that there is something. Like I hate the idea of there being nothing, and that's it. That's depressing. So I'd rather, I'm glad that the mystery is still there, and I'd rather keep that hope and believe that, we can come back, connect in some way, or have some presence in some form. We don't know what that is, but it's comforting to think that that's possible. And these stories about it are amazing. I mean, there's, along those lines, there's the reincarnation stories, which I'm totally fascinated by.
Can you share one?
Yeah, I'm trying to. Oh my God, I'm forgetting this young girl's name. There's a young girl in India. I wrote about this years ago, so sorry, it's not totally fresh in my head. But this was like 1920s, and so again, 1920s. So it's before mass communication, right? Like, there's none of what we're doing right now. There's no social media, barely a telephone, So when she was a young kid, she starts asking about her husband and describing certain things from a past life that make no sense, and describing things that she should have no knowledge of about a village that's hundreds of miles away. So clearly a place she'd never been. And this is going on and on and on. And like she just keeps describing things and talking about it. So finally the family plans a trip to this other village. And when they arrive there, they're picked up in like, a cab, whatever, driver with some sort of cart, horse, whatever it was at that point, and she steers them to the house that she says she lived in with her husband, and he's there.
Mhm.
Uh, and then she goes up to a room where some money was supposed to be hidden, and she's looking for it, and finally he's like, "Yeah, there was money there. Actually, I moved it." Like, there's all these amazing things that she was right about. She knew all these things. Again, this was a little kid, and she had died, I think, during childbirth.
Hmm.
So stories like that fascinate me. There's quite a few stories like that out there, and just like
Mhm.
how could someone possibly have this information?
Right.
Again, it's not like today you could dig up all kinds of things if you want to, and act like you had information just because information is so accessible. But back then, it wasn't. It's just like, how
Mhm.
else? How do you explain something like that? I have no idea, other than it being what she said it was.
It's like walking, it's like walking into a building and feeling that you've been there before, but you can't explain why.
Yeah, yeah. This girl's name, by the way, was Shanti Devi.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was thinking that's what it was. I just want to confirm really quick. Yeah.
But it is, you get those feelings like, okay, I've been here, I know the building, I don't know why. And maybe that comes from a past life.
Yeah, just like a lingering bit of information, but this
There's
young
a
woman
lot of
had a
stories
lot of.
like the little boy who died, during the attack on Pearl Harbor. He can describe everything, all the planes flying over and all that stuff. It's
Yeah,
incredible.
yeah. So again, it's like, okay, well, maybe there's something seems to be happening.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. Have you done any research, during your research on any stories that scared you at all?
I wouldn't say scared me.
Okay.
Um, the interesting thing about the paranormal and ghosts, I find it kind of odd that that like ghosts are sort of in the horror category, right? Like, generally
Hmm.
speaking, like ghosts are like monsters and scary.
Hmm.
But really, like, researching these different experiences and so forth, the idea of a ghost, that's the answer that we want, right? Like, that should be really exciting to see, because then it's like, if seeing it yourself and having that personal experience
Right.
tells you that, okay, so there is something there.
Hmm.
And I mentioned I haven't seen a UFO. I haven't had an experience where I feel like I saw a ghost, but I did recently have an experience that for me was fairly transformative. For my new book I'm working on, I took a class in remote viewing with one of the remote viewers. And remote viewing is like a psychic experience where, from wherever you are, you can get impressions in your head of a target location that someone may give you. You don't know anything about it, but you start to sketch things and find information. And then,
Hmm.
obviously then you check to see if you got anything right with someone who knows what it's supposed to be. So the government was using remote viewers for 20 years to try and find out, secrets from the Russians, and find, hostages and missing, all kinds of different um,
Hmm.
tasks that they were given. So I took a class with one of the Army um, remote viewers, and he said, like, anyone can do this. He didn't know he could do it until he tried it, and he would give us these tasks each week, and I was amazed at the success I was having. Like, because I'm doing what he said to do, and I have no idea what he's going to show me the next week. I submit the stuff in advance, and then he shows what the target is, and I see some similarities the first couple of weeks, but then the last week, that freaked me out. Couldn't believe how close what he showed was to what I had drawn. And
Hmm.
this was a place he went to, and he said, tell me, draw this place that I'm at this time. And I drew like a dome structure with these columns. That was the most clear impression I had in my head.
Wow.
And he was standing at a place called the Centurium in Utah, and it was a dome structure with columns,
Nice.
and it freaked me out. Like, it could have been at the zoo next to the seals. You know what I mean? Like
Right. Right. Right.
a hot dog cart. I mean, who knows? But I was uh I was blown away having my own experience, thinking like, okay, it seems like there's something's going on here.
Absolutely. Mark, this hour has flown by, and I thank you for coming on. I could pick your brain all day and talk to you about
Thanks
these
for
freaks. I could, this whole thing, this whole sphere. Hopefully,
yeah.
we can get you back on sometime to talk some more about stuff, because there's just so many questions and not enough time, as the saying goes.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's always fun to talk about this
Absolutely.
stuff.
what's next for you?
Well, I mentioned I have a new book coming out from Cork Books again. That's, I think, due January 26th, about secret government projects, which is a lot of fun. And then I also, back to Sideshow, I have a book coming out hopefully February 2025. I'm co-writing with a sword swallower. It's called To the Hilt, A Sword Swallower's History of Sword Swallowing. We cover more than 80 historical sword swallowers and couple dozen modern day sword swallowers. They're amazing stories. So there's a lot of, no other book's been written like this. I'm pretty excited about that. A ton of amazing stories and information, and truly incredible people.
What a great title, To the Hilt. I love it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
For people that don't know about swords, look it up, guys. That's just a great title. And stuff. How can people contact you and find you?
You can see my books at markhartzmanbooks.com. It's Mark, M-A-R-C, H-A-R-T-Z-M-A-N, books.com. I'm on Instagram at Marc Hartzman. Go to weirdhistorian.com, or on Instagram it's at weirdhistorian. So I'm easy to find that way. And check out the books on Amazon or wherever you buy books.
Fantastic. Thank you again, and we'll have to get you back on. Thank you so much for coming on. I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. You have a great one.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Yeah, I love this stuff. Like I said, I could pick his brain all day. I grew up, reading those books about the freaks, like, Mars, you name it. This is it. I got a library back here full of stuff, too. In fact, I got a couple of his books. He doesn't even know that. Okay, tomorrow, we're kind of shifting gears. Another mystery. I think you guys will like it. Rusty McClure is going to be with us, and we're going to be talking about the Coral Castle. And I remember years ago, even on shows like In Search Of, seeing stories about this thing, where this gentleman had built this castle, and large granite stones that somehow he moved into position to build this thing. Now, did he use telepathy to build this? Were the aliens helping him? Was the same kind of technology, used in ancient Egypt? Did he use that, to build? Nobody really knows what's going on. But Rusty McClure has done a lot of research into this, and he's got a couple of great books on it. So he's going to be with us tomorrow. Our usual time is 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Okay? All right. Well, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. And I will see you tomorrow. If you like, I got ahead of myself, didn't I? If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. We are Equal Opportunity here, California House Radio, and just trying to get the word out about our little old show. And so you guys are doing great. And Pamela, I see you in the chat room. Hello. And I want to thank everybody for coming. The ones that were listening, the lurkers that listen, and the people that are in the chat room and all that good stuff, and then the people in the future here, the RSS feed. Thank you all. Thank you all for your support, and thank you. All right. I will see you tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Have a great evening, everybody.